I still remember the taste of that morning. Thin oatmeal and powdered milk mixed with water that had sat too long in the pipes. The same breakfast I had eaten for 4,380 days at the Riverside Home for Children in Asheville, North Carolina. But that Monday in November of 1932 was different. That was the morning my brother and I would stand in a courtroom while strangers laughed at us. I was 18 years old. My name was Elena Whitmore, and I had spent 12 years learning that hope was a luxury I could not afford. My brother Silas was 15, 3 years younger, thin as a fence post, and the only person in the world who belonged to me. We had been at Riverside since I was 6 and Silas was 3. Our mother died of the Spanish flu in the spring of 1920. Our father, broken by grief and whiskey, drove his truck into a ravine 6 months later. The state of North Carolina collected us like stray dogs and deposited us at Riverside, where we learned to make ourselves small to eat fast, to trust no one but each other. I remember the day they separated us into different dormitories. Silas was 6 years old, crying so hard he could barely breathe, reaching for me as the matron pulled him away. I promised him that night, whispering through the crack under the door that connected our hallways, that I would never leave him. That when I turned 18, I would take him with me and we would find somewhere to belong. I did not know that somewhere had been waiting for us all along. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in October. The headmistress called me to her office, a room I had only entered twice before, both times for punishment. She handed me an envelope without speaking, her face arranged in an expression I could not read. The letter was from a lawyer in a town called Pine Haven in Mitchell County in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina. It informed me that my grandfather Isaac Blackwood had died in May of that year, and that his estate was being settled. As his only surviving descendants, my brother and I were named in his will. I read the letter 3 times. Then I read it again. Grandfather. I had not known we had a grandfather. No one had ever told us. No one had ever mentioned that somewhere in the world there was family. There was blood. There was someone who might have wanted us. The headmistress watched me read. When I looked up, she said only this: the court date is November 14th. The county will provide transportation. She did not say she was sorry. She did not say she had known about our grandfather and kept it from us. She did not say anything at all about the fact that for 12 years, 2 children had lived in her institution, believing they were alone in the world, when all along there had been someone out there who shared their name. I walked back to the dormitory in a daze. That night I told Silas. We lay in the dark of my room, the one privilege of turning 18 being a closet-sized space of my own, and I whispered the words to him. We have a grandfather. We had a grandfather. He died in May. He left us something. Silas was silent for a long time. Then he said the question I could not answer. Why didn't he come for us? I did not have an answer. I still do not know if I have one now. The bus ride from Asheville to Pine Haven took 7 hours. We left before dawn on November 14th, wearing the best clothes Riverside could provide, which meant shirts that had been white before 3 other children wore them, and shoes stuffed with newspaper because they were too big. The driver gave us each an apple and a paper bag with a sandwich inside. It was the first time anyone at Riverside had given us anything. Silas sat by the window and watched North Carolina scroll past. Red clay hills and pine forests and small towns that looked like they had been forgotten by time. He did not speak much. Silas never spoke much, but his hand found mine somewhere around Marion, and he held on until we reached Pine Haven. The Mitchell County Courthouse sat on a square of brown grass in the center of town. It was a brick building with white columns and tall windows that reflected the November sky like mirrors. I stood outside for a moment looking up at it, and I felt something I had not felt in 12 years. I felt afraid, not afraid of the building, not afraid of the people inside. Afraid of hope, afraid of wanting something and having it taken away. I had learned at Riverside that the safest way to survive disappointment was to never expect anything in the first place. But here I was standing outside a courthouse with my brother beside me, about to learn what our grandfather had left us. And despite everything I knew about the world, despite every lesson I had learned about keeping my heart small and safe, I felt that dangerous flutter of possibility in my chest. We walked inside. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wooden benches like church pews. A judge's bench at the front. A handful of people scattered throughout. Most of them dressed in the practical clothes of farmers and merchants. They turned to look at us when we entered, and I saw their eyes move from my face to Silas's, taking in our two big shoes, and our borrowed clothes and our uncertain expressions. A young lawyer approached us. He introduced himself as Mr. Harper, and he spoke to us the way people speak to children, even though I was 18 and legally an adult. He explained that we should sit in the front row. He explained that the judge would read the will. He explained that there might be some questions. I nodded at everything he said. I did not ask the question that was burning in my throat. Why did our grandfather never come for us? The judge was a heavy man with a red face and spectacles that kept sliding down his nose. He shuffled papers for what felt like an eternity before he began to read. The last will and testament of Isaac Blackwood, orchardist and naturalist of Mitchell County, North Carolina, deceased May 3rd, 1932. I felt Silas stiffen beside me. To my grandchildren, Elena Whitmore and Silas Whitmore, currently residing at the Riverside Home for Children in Asheville, I leave the entirety of my estate, consisting of the following. The judge cleared his throat. 75 acres on the eastern slope of Shadow Peak Ridge, including one peach orchard of approximately 180 trees, one stone cabin with a collapsed chimney, one barn with no roof, and whatever personal effects remain on the property. He paused. He looked at us over his spectacles. The county assessor has valued the entire parcel at $17. The laughter started somewhere in the back of the room. I did not turn to see who laughed first. I did not need to. I could feel it spreading through the courtroom like fire through dry grass. One person, then two, then half a dozen. Their voices rising in a wave of amusement that washed over us and broke against the judge's bench. $17. 75 acres of land, and it was worth $17. A man stood up in the back of the room. He was large and well-dressed with the bearing of someone who owned things and people and expected both to do as he was told. His face was ruddy with health and his laugh was the loudest in the room. "Your Honor," he said, "I believe I should make my offer now before these children get their hopes up any further." The judge nodded. "Mr. Hargrove, you may speak." The man, Clayton Hargrove, walked to the front of the courtroom with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. He stopped a few feet from where Silas and I sat and looked down at us with an expression that was meant to be kind, but felt like a hand pressing us down into our seats. "I've been trying to buy that ridge from old Isaac for 20 years, he said. "He never would sell. Stubborn as a mule and twice as foolish." He smiled at his own joke. Several people in the courtroom laughed. Now I don't know what that old fool was thinking leaving his land to 2 children from an orphanage who wouldn't know a peach tree from a pine stump. But I'm prepared to make this right. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet. From the wallet, he withdrew several bills and held them up for the courtroom to see. $40 cash money right now, plus 2 bus tickets back to Asheville and a hot meal before you go. He looked at me, then at Silas, then back at me. "That's more than the land is worth. That's more than anyone else would give you. And it's the smart thing to do because those trees have been dead for 12 years. That orchard hasn't produced fruit since before you were born. There's nothing up there but rocks and dead sticks and a cabin that'll fall down around your ears come the first hard freeze." He held out the money. "What do you say?" I could feel every eye in the courtroom on me. I could feel their expectations pressing down on me like a weight. They expected me to take the money. They expected me to be grateful. They expected me to accept that a man like Clayton Hargrove knew better than a girl like me what was best for my future. I thought about the letter. I thought about our grandfather dead in May, leaving us everything he had. I thought about the question I had been afraid to ask. Why did he never come for us? I stood up. "I would like to see the property first," I said. Clayton Hargrove blinked. The laughter in the room died away, replaced by a murmur of confusion. "Girl," he said, "there's nothing to see. The orchard's been dead for—" I would like to see it. I do not know what he heard in my voice. I was not being brave. I was being finished. Finished with the laughter. Finished with the way people looked at us like we were something to be pitied or dismissed. Finished with sitting still while strangers decided what our lives would be. "I would like to see what my grandfather left us," I said. "Then I will make a decision." Clayton Hargrove's face went red. For a moment I thought he would argue, but the judge cleared his throat and said, "The young lady has the right to inspect her inheritance before disposing of it. Mr. Hargrove, you may make your offer again after she has done so." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. He put the money back in his wallet. He looked at me with an expression that was no longer pretending to be kind. "I'll be back," he said, "and the price will be the same because that land isn't going to look any better up close than it does on paper." He turned and walked out of the courtroom. Several people followed him. The rest stayed watching us with expressions of pity and curiosity and in some cases something that looked almost like hope. The lawyer gave us directions. A church deacon was driving back toward the ridge and agreed to take us as far as the fork at Willow Creek. He did not speak to us for the entire ride. When he let us out at the fork, he pointed up a dirt track that disappeared into the trees. 2 miles. The cabin is past the orchard. You'll see it. He paused. You'll want to come back before dark. We did not come back. The track up Shadow Peak Ridge was steep enough that we had to lean forward to keep our balance. Silas was breathing hard by the time we reached the top, his thin chest heaving, his hand tight in mine. I wanted to stop and let him rest, but something was pulling me forward, something I could not name. The orchard appeared without warning. We came around a bend in the track, and suddenly there it was, spreading out before us on the slope of the hill. 180 peach trees standing in rows, like soldiers waiting for orders that would never come. Leafless, gray-barked, their branches twisted bare against the November sky. Dead. Silas stopped walking. I stopped with him. "Elena," he whispered, "it looks like a graveyard." He was right. The trees stood silent and skeletal, their branches reaching toward the sky like hands raised in surrender. The grass between the rows was brown and matted. The whole hillside had the look of something that had been abandoned long ago, something that had given up hope and settled into decay. I understood why Clayton Hargrove had laughed. I understood why the whole courtroom had laughed. This was what our grandfather had left us. This was the sum total of his legacy, a hillside of dead sticks and a piece of paper that said we owned them. "Come on," I said to Silas. "Let's see the house." The cabin was worse. The chimney had collapsed on the south side, scattering stones across the porch. The door hung from one hinge. The windows were intact, but thick with grime. And when I pushed the door open, the smell that came out was the smell of abandonment, dust and mold and the cold, damp air of a place where no one had lived for months. Inside, there was one room with a stone fireplace, a sleeping loft reached by a ladder, a plank table, a 3-legged stool. The cold was bone deep, the kind of cold that settled into your joints and made your teeth ache. Silas stood in the doorway, his arms wrapped around himself. "We can't stay here," he said. I looked at the fireplace. I looked at the stove, a small cast-iron box stove in the corner, its pipe disappearing through a hole in the wall. I looked at the stack of firewood against the back wall covered with a tarp, dry and seasoned. Someone had cut that wood. Someone had stacked it and covered it and left it here, knowing that winter was coming, knowing that someone would need it, knowing that we would need it. "Yes, we can," I said. "We're going to stay." I should tell you about those first 3 weeks, because they almost killed us. I do not say that for dramatic effect. I say it because it is true. Silas and I came within days of dying on that ridge, and the only reason we survived was that we were too stubborn to give up and too desperate to have anywhere else to go. The food ran out on the 5th day. I had brought nothing from Riverside because we had nothing to bring. The cabin held a jar of dried beans hard as pebbles, a tin of lard, and a sack of cornmeal that smelled of mice, but was mostly clean. I rationed it carefully. But 5 days is 5 days, and two hungry people can only stretch a handful of beans so far. After that, we foraged. I had learned nothing about living off the land in 12 years at Riverside, and Silas knew even less. But hunger is a teacher, and desperation makes you learn fast. I found persimmons on the trees below the ridge, wrinkled and soft from the first frost, so sweet they made my teeth ache. I found hickory nuts in the leaf litter, though cracking them took an hour for a handful of meat. I set snares from wire I found in the barn, using a diagram I had memorized from a book years ago. A book about wilderness survival that I had read during a week when I had nothing else to read and nowhere else to escape. I caught nothing the first week. I caught nothing the second week. We ate persimmons until our stomachs cramped and hickory nuts until our fingers bled from cracking the shells. And then Silas got sick. It started with a cough, then a fever, then 3 days of shaking and sweating his body, burning up from the inside, while the November wind howled around the cabin and found every crack in the walls. I did not sleep those 3 days. I held him through the nights, his thin body trembling against mine, his breath hot and ragged in my ear. I boiled water and made him drink it. I wrapped him in every blanket I could find, including the ones I had taken off my own bed. And I sat beside him and sang the songs our mother used to sing, songs I had not sung in 12 years, songs I thought I had forgotten, and I prayed. I had not prayed since the day they took us to Riverside. I had decided then that if God existed, He had no interest in children like us, and I would not waste my breath asking for His help. But sitting in that cold cabin watching my brother fight for his life, I prayed anyway. I prayed to God. I prayed to our mother. I prayed to our grandfather, dead in May, a man I had never met. Please, I whispered, please don't take him from me. He's all I have. On the 4th morning, Silas's fever broke. He opened his eyes and looked at me and said, "I'm hungry." I cried. For the first time since they had separated us at Riverside, for the first time in 12 years, I cried. I sat on the floor of that ruined cabin, with my brother's hand in mine, and I cried until I could not breathe, until my chest hurt, until there was nothing left inside me but relief. Silas watched me with wide eyes. "Elena," he said, "I'm okay. I'm okay." But I was not crying because I thought he was gonna die. I was crying because I had finally understood something I had been afraid to admit. I loved him. I loved him more than I had ever loved anything or anyone. And I would do whatever it took to keep him alive. Clayton Hargrove came back on the 12th day. I heard his automobile before I saw it, the engine growling as it climbed the track. I was outside trying to fix a trap that had been sprung by something too clever to get caught, and I straightened up and watched him come. His car was black and shiny out of place on the muddy track. He parked in front of the cabin and stepped out, picking his way carefully around the puddles, protecting his fine leather shoes from the dirt. "Still here," he said. It was not a question. "Still here." I agreed. He looked at the cabin with its sagging porch and collapsed chimney. He looked at the orchard with its rows of dead trees. He looked at me in my dirty dress and my two big shoes with my hair unwashed and my hands raw from work. $50, he said. Bus tickets back to Asheville. A hot meal and a blanket for each of you for the journey. He paused. That's my final offer. I thought about Silas inside, still weak from his fever. I thought about the food we did not have and the winter that was coming. I thought about how easy it would be to take his money and go back to the only life we had ever known. But I also thought about the firewood stacked against the wall. I thought about a man cutting that wood, knowing winter was coming, knowing someone would need it, knowing we would need it. No, I said. Clayton Hargrove's face did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something cold and patient, like a snake waiting for its prey to make a mistake. You'll die up here, he said. You understand that, don't you? You and that boy will die up here before spring, and no one will find you until the buzzards lead someone to your bodies. I looked at him. I thought about all the people who had told me what I could not do. The teachers at Riverside who said I would never amount to anything. The matrons who said I was too proud for my own good. The other children who said I was crazy for believing things could be different. My grandfather didn't sell to you for 20 years, I said. He must have had a reason. His reason was that he was a fool. A crazy old fool who spent 30 years digging in the dirt and talking to trees that wouldn't grow. This county laughed at him, and they were right to laugh. Then why do you want his land so badly? The question surprised him. I saw it in his face, a flicker of uncertainty that he quickly covered with his usual expression of condescending patience. The timber, he said, on the ridge above the orchard. Good hardwood worth something if you know how to harvest it. But I had seen the way he looked at the orchard. Not at the ridge above, at the orchard itself, at the dead trees standing in their patient rows. There was something he was not telling me. I'm not selling, I said. Clayton Hargrove put his hands in his pockets. He rocked back on his heels and looked up at the sky as if he were considering the weather. I'll be back, he said. When you're hungry enough, when the boy gets sick again and you can't save him. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. I'm a patient man, Miss Whitmore. I can wait. He got back in his car and drove away. I watched until he disappeared around the bend in the track. Then I went inside to find Silas. It was Silas who found the mule. 3 days after Hargrove's visit, he was well enough to explore. I had forbidden him to leave the cabin. But Silas had never been good at following orders. And by the 4th day, he was gone before I woke up. I found him in the barn. The roofless barn open to the sky, smelling of old hay. And animals and something else I could not identify. Silas was standing at the far end, perfectly still, his hand extended towards something in the shadows. Don't move, he whispered without turning around. I stopped. From the shadows, a shape emerged, gray and bony and covered with dust. Ears laid flat against its skull. Teeth bared in warning. A mule. Her name is Bramble, Silas said. At least that's what it says on the stall. I looked. There was a brass nameplate on the post screen with age. Bramble. She won't let me touch her, Silas said. But she hasn't kicked me yet. I think that's progress. I watched the mule watching us. She was old and starving and clearly terrified. But she had not run. She had not attacked. She was waiting like us to see what would happen next. Where did she come from? I asked. She was here the whole time, hiding in the back. I found her this morning when I came to look for tools. I thought about Clayton Hargrove driving past the barn every time he came up the track. I thought about the weeks we had been here, starving and struggling and never knowing that a living creature was waiting in the darkness 100 feet from our door. We need to feed her, I said. I know. But there's something else. Silas turned to look at me. His face was pale and serious the way it got when he was thinking hard about something. I found something in the cabin while you were sleeping. I was looking for blankets in the loft, and I noticed the hearthstones in the fireplace. One of them was loose. My heart began to beat faster. What was under it? Come see. The tin box was old and rusted, but the lid was tight, and when I pried it open, the contents inside were dry and preserved. 11 notebooks, a magnifying glass, and a letter addressed to us. I held the letter in my hands, afraid to open it. Silas sat beside me on the floor of the cabin, our shoulders touching, both of us staring at our names written in a handwriting neither of us had ever seen. Open it, Silas said. I opened it. The paper was thick and cream-colored, the kind of paper that cost money. The handwriting was shaky but clear, written by someone old or sick. Someone who had something important to say and was running out of time to say it. Dear Elena and Silas, if you are reading this letter, then I am dead, and the lawyers have finally done their job. I have been trying to find you for 12 years. I have been writing to the Riverside home since the day I learned you were there, and every letter I sent was returned unopened. They would not tell me where you were. They would not let me visit. They would not even tell me if you were alive. I hired a lawyer. He told me the system was designed to protect children from people who might harm them, and that, as a distant relative with no prior relationship, I had no legal standing to intervene. I wrote to judges. I wrote to politicians. I wrote to the governor. No one would help. So I waited. I waited for Elena to turn 18 because I knew that on that day she would be free to leave, and I hoped she would take Silas with her. I waited and I prepared and I tried to build something worth inheriting. I am sorry I could not come for you myself. I am sorry I could not save you from those years in that place. I am sorry for everything you suffered while I was here doing the only thing I could do, waiting for the day you would be free. The notebooks will explain everything. Read them in order. Do not skip ahead. The orchard is not dead. The soil is not empty. Everything I have spent 30 years learning is in these pages. Trust the dirt. It knows more than any of us. I love you. I have always loved you. And I am sorry I could not tell you in person. Your grandfather, Isaac Blackwood. I could not breathe. At the bottom of the tin box beneath the notebooks, I found them. A bundle of envelopes tied with string, each one addressed to the Riverside Home for Children. Each one stamped in red ink that had faded to brown. Returned to sender. I counted them with trembling hands. 47. 47 letters he had written to us over 12 years. 47 times he had tried to reach us. 47 times he had been rejected. I held the bundle to my chest, and I wept. Not the quiet tears of relief I had shed when Silas's fever broke. These were the loud, ugly sobs of a grief I had been carrying for 12 years, finally allowed to break free. I cried for the grandmother I had never known. I cried for the mother I barely remembered. I cried for the father who had driven into a ravine rather than face a world without his wife. And I cried for Isaac Blackwood, who had spent 30 years being called a fool and 12 years being denied the right to love us, and who had died alone in May, knowing he would never see our faces. Silas put his arms around me. He held me while I cried, this boy who had been forced to grow up too fast. This child who had spent his whole life being protected by me. He tried, Silas said. He tried to find us. I know. He loved us. I know. We have to stay, Elena. We have to stay and find out what he wanted us to know. I wiped my face with my sleeve. I looked at the notebooks stacked on the floor, 11 of them, each one filled with tiny handwriting that I could barely read in the fading light. We'll start tomorrow, I said. First thing. But Silas was already reaching for the first notebook. We'll start now, he said. Silas read through the night. I fell asleep sometime after midnight, curled up on the floor by the stove with my coat over me and the cold pressing in from every crack in the walls. But Silas kept reading, his eyes moving over the tiny handwriting by candlelight, turning pages so carefully you would think they were made of gold. When I woke at dawn, he was still reading, but his face had changed. He looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not excitement exactly. Something deeper. Something that looked like awe. Elena, he said, you need to see this. He handed me the first notebook. I took it, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and I began to read. The handwriting was small and cramped. The letters packed so tightly together that I had to hold the page close to my face to make them out. But as I read, as I turned page after page of measurements and observations and careful, patient documentation, I began to understand. Isaac Blackwood had not been a fool. He had not been crazy. He had been the most patient man who ever lived. The first entry was dated April 1901. Dug test pit number 1 today. Northeast corner of the orchard, 3 feet deep. Top 12 inches red clay, typical Southern Appalachian residual. Below that, 8 inches of dense orange clay with quartz fragments. Below that, something I have not seen before. A layer of dark material, almost black, with a texture unlike any soil I have encountered. It is not clay. It is not sand. It holds moisture without becoming mud. It smells of iron and sweetness. It crumbles in the hand. and then reconstitutes when pressed. I do not know what it is. I intend to find out. I kept reading, entry after entry, year after year. Isaac Blackwood had mapped what lay beneath his orchard. He had dug dozens of test pits, some of them 10 feet deep, some of them 14. He had collected samples and labeled them and sent them to the Agricultural College in Raleigh for analysis. He had measured and recorded and hypothesized all in handwriting so small it seemed designed to fit a lifetime of knowledge into a finite number of pages. And what he had discovered was extraordinary. The red clay that covered the ridge, the thin, acidic, nutrient-poor soil that everyone pointed to as proof that nothing could grow. There was only the surface, a skin. Beneath it, starting at a depth of 2 to 3 feet and extending down as far as Isaac had been able to dig, was a layer of black earth unlike anything in the county. Notebook number 4 contained a report from the State Agricultural College. The words were dry and scientific, but what they described was anything but ordinary. Soil sample exhibits extraordinary fertility, rich in calcium, phosphorus, and organic carbon. Microbial density approximately 10 times that of typical Appalachian soil. Origin unknown. Possibly ancient alluvial deposit or decomposed limestone base. Further study recommended. Further study had never been done. No one had cared about Isaac Blackwood's dirt. But that was only half of it. "Look at this," Silas said, handing me notebook number 7. I took it. I read. The peach trees, the dead orchard, the gray skeletons that had been the punchline of every joke in Mitchell County for 12 years, were not dead. They had gone dormant. Isaac's notebooks documented this with the patient fury of a man who had been screaming the truth into a room full of people who refused to listen. The trees had stopped producing fruit, not because they were dying, but because they were building. Their root systems, which Isaac had traced through careful excavation over a period of years, had grown downward through the red clay and into the black earth below. And they were connected. The roots of all 180 trees were linked through a web of mycorrhizal fungi, a vast underground network that Isaac described in his cramped handwriting as the largest living thing on this ridge, and no one can see it, because no one has bothered to dig. The trees had been investing everything, every calorie of photosynthesis, every mineral drawn from that extraordinary soil into the root network below. They were not dying. They were preparing. Notebook number 9, dated 1931, contained a table of calculations, root depth measurements, nutrient analyses, growth projections. At the bottom, underlined twice, Isaac had written, "Based on current growth rate of the root network and the nutrient density of the subclay soil layer, I estimate the trees will have sufficient root infrastructure to support full production within 2 to 4 years. Probable first fruiting 1933 or 1934. Yield potential once the root network reaches full maturity, 4 to 6 times the original production. The trees will produce more fruit than any orchard in this county, and no one will believe it until they see it." I set down the notebook. I looked at Silas. He knew, I said. He knew. Silas agreed. He knew the orchard wasn't dead. He knew it was gonna wake up. That's why he kept the land. That's why he never sold to Hargrove. That's why he left it to us. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what we had just learned settling over us like a blanket. Outside, the wind moved through the dead trees with a sound like whispered secrets. "There's more," Silas said. "In the last notebook. Look at the last entry." I took the notebook. I turned to the final page. The handwriting here was shakier than before, written by a hand that was losing its strength. March 1932. I am dying. The doctor says I have weeks, perhaps a month. I have written to the lawyers. I have made my arrangements. I have done everything I can think of to ensure that the land goes to Elena and Silas. But there is something I have not written down, something I have not told anyone. When I press my ear to the ground in the orchard, I can hear the roots growing. I can hear them moving slowly, patiently, reaching deeper into the soil. And sometimes in the early morning, when the dew is still on the grass and the light comes slanting through the trees, I swear I can hear them singing. I do not know what this means. I do not know if it is real, or if my dying mind is playing tricks on me. But I believe in my heart that this orchard is alive in a way that science cannot fully explain. I believe that the trees have been waiting for something, or someone. Perhaps they have been waiting for Elena and Silas. They will call me crazy. They have called me crazy for 30 years. But I know what I know. Sometimes what looks dead is only waiting. Waiting for the right time. Waiting for the right person. Elena and Silas, if you are reading this, remember you are not dead wood either. You are not what they told you in that place. You are seeds that have not yet found the right soil. Be patient. Grow deep. And when your time comes, bloom so bright that the whole world has to look. I closed the notebook. I could not speak. Silas was crying silently the way he had learned to cry at Riverside, where making noise meant punishment. Tears running down his face, his shoulders shaking, his hands clenched in his lap. I put my arm around him. "He believed in us," Silas whispered. "He never even met us, and he believed in us. I know. We can't let him down, Elena. We have to do what he said. We have to wait for the trees." I looked out the window at the orchard. 180 trees standing in their patient rows, gray and bare, and seemingly dead. The whole world thought they were dead. The whole county had laughed at the man who insisted they were alive. But Isaac Blackwood had seen what no one else could see. He had looked beneath the surface. He had trusted the dirt. And now it was our turn. "We'll do it," I said. "We'll follow his instructions. We'll prepare the orchard and wait for spring." "What if nothing happens?" Silas asked. "What if the trees don't wake up? Then we'll know we tried." But I did not believe that nothing would happen. I had read the notebooks. I had seen the calculations. I had felt something when I stood in the orchard that first day. something I had not understood at the time, but was beginning to understand now. The trees were not dead. They were waiting, and they had been waiting for us. We were not alone for long. 3 days after we found the notebooks, a man appeared at the edge of the orchard. He was old and black, 72 years old, as I would later learn, with white hair cropped close to his skull, and hands that were gnarled from decades of work. He carried a sack over one shoulder and stood at the boundary of our land like he was waiting for permission to enter. I walked out to meet him. "You're Isaac's grandchildren," he said, not a question. "I'm Elena. My brother is Silas." He nodded. He looked at me with eyes that had seen a lot of life and had not been made bitter by it. "My name is Obadiah Trent. I was your grandfather's friend. His only friend, some might say." He shifted the sack on his shoulder. "I brought you some food. Sweet potatoes, buttermilk, a little salt pork." I wanted to cry. I wanted to throw my arms around this stranger and thank him for his kindness. But I had learned at Riverside that kindness usually came with strings attached, and I had to know what the strings were before I could accept the gift. "Why?" I asked. He smiled. It was a sad smile, the smile of someone who understood exactly why I was asking. 30 years ago, I was about to lose my land. Bad year, bad luck, bad everything. The bank was going to take my farm. Isaac Blackwood came to my door with a cash box and counted out enough money to pay my mortgage. I asked him what he wanted in return. He said nothing. Farmers take care of each other. Obadiah set the sack on the ground. I tried to pay him back for 15 years. He wouldn't take a penny. He's gone now. I can't pay him back, but I can pay you. I looked at the sack. I looked at this old man who had walked up the ridge to bring food to 2 strangers because of a debt he owed to a man who was dead. "Thank you," I said. "There's more coming. My granddaughter Verity, she's about your brother's age. She'll be up tomorrow with more supplies. And I'll teach you what you need to know to survive up here." He looked at the orchard, at the dead trees standing in their silent rows. Isaac spent 30 years studying this land. He told me what he found. The others laughed at him, but I never did. You believed him. I believed him because I knew him. Isaac Blackwood didn't lie. If he said those trees were going to wake up, then those trees are going to wake up. He paused. "The question is whether you're going to be here when they do." "We're staying," I said. "We're not selling. Not to Clayton Hargrove. Not to anyone." Obadiah Trent smiled again, and this time it was not sad. "Good," he said. "Then we have work to do. The winter was hard, but we survived it. Obadiah came every week, sometimes twice a week, bringing food and tools and knowledge. His granddaughter Verity came with him, a quiet girl with sharp eyes and clever hands. And she and Silas became friends in the way that only 2 lonely children can become friends, finding in each other something they had been missing all their lives. But the cold was relentless. December brought ice storms that coated the orchard in glass and made the trees look like sculptures of crystal. January brought snow that piled 3 feet deep around the cabin. and made it impossible to leave for days at a time. We burned through the firewood Isaac had left us, and then we burned everything else we could find. Old fence posts, broken furniture, the three-legged stool that had been in the cabin when we arrived. There were nights when the temperature dropped so low that the water froze in the bucket beside the stove. Nights when Silas and I slept curled together under every blanket we owned and still woke shivering in the dark. Nights when I lay awake wondering if Clayton Hargrove had been right, if we would die up here before spring, if our stubbornness would be the thing that killed us. But every morning we woke up alive, and every morning I read another page of Isaac's notebooks. The notebooks became my Bible. I read them by candlelight when Silas was asleep. I read them by the gray light of winter mornings when the world outside was locked in ice. I read them until I could recite passages from memory, until Isaac's handwriting became as familiar to me as my own. Notebook Number 3 contained detailed instructions for winter orchard care, pruning schedules, techniques for removing dead wood without damaging the living tissue beneath, diagrams showing which branches to cut and which to preserve. Isaac had drawn each cut with the precision of a surgeon, noting angles and depths and the reasons behind every decision. I followed his instructions exactly. In late January, when the snow melted enough to walk between the rows, I began to prune. I worked slowly, carefully, comparing each tree to Isaac's diagrams. Silas helped when he was strong enough, holding the ladder steady, while I climbed, catching the branches as I cut them away. The work was hard. My hands blistered and bled. My arms ached from reaching and sawing. But there was something meditative about it, something that felt like prayer. Every cut I made was a conversation with a man I had never met. Every branch I removed was an act of faith in something I could not see. Obadiah watched me work one afternoon in February. He stood at the edge of the orchard, his breath making clouds in the cold air, saying nothing. When I climbed down from the ladder, he walked over and examined the cuts I had made. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to me. Notebook Number 5 contained instructions for soil amendment. Isaac had developed a formula, a mixture of wood ash and crushed limestone and composted manure that he believed would stimulate the mycorrhizal network when spring came. The ratios were precise: 2 parts ash to 1 part limestone to 3 parts manure, spread in a circle 12 inches from the trunk of each tree, worked into the soil to a depth of 4 inches. We did not have manure. We did not have limestone. But Obadiah did. He brought it up the ridge in his wagon, bag after bag, more than I thought we would ever need. He showed me how to mix it, how to measure the circles, how to work it into the frozen ground without damaging the roots below. "Why are you helping us?" I asked him one day. We were working side by side, our hands black with soil, our breath visible in the February air. He did not answer right away. He finished spreading the mixture around the base of a tree, patted it down with his shovel, then straightened up and looked at me. "Because Isaac believed in you," he said. "And if Isaac believed in you, that's good enough for me." But it was not just Obadiah who helped. Others came too, though they came quietly, secretly, as if they were afraid of being seen. Mrs. Adelaide from the general store in Pine Haven drove up one Sunday with a box of canned goods and set it on the porch without a word. Reverend Miller from the Methodist Church brought blankets and left them folded by the door. The school teacher, Miss Cordelia, brought books for Silas' old textbooks that she said the school no longer needed, but which I suspected she had bought with her own money. They did not stay long. They did not ask for anything in return. They came and left their gifts and drove away, and I understood that they were trying to make amends for something. For the laughter in the courtroom, perhaps. For the years they had spent calling Isaac Blackwood a fool. For their own shame at having judged so quickly and so harshly. I accepted their gifts with gratitude, but I did not forget what I had learned. The world was full of people who would help you when it cost them nothing, and abandon you the moment it became inconvenient. The only person I could truly rely on was myself and Silas, and maybe, just maybe, the memory of a grandfather who had spent 30 years preparing the ground for a miracle. Clayton Hargrove did not come back in January. He did not come back in February, but I knew he was waiting, watching, biding his time like a predator that knows its prey cannot run forever. The first sign of trouble came in early March. I woke one morning to find that someone had been on our land during the night. Boot prints in the mud near the orchard. Cigarette butts scattered near the tree line. The lock on the barn door broken, the hinges pried loose with a crowbar. Nothing was taken. Bramble was unharmed. But the message was clear. We are watching you. We can get to you whenever we want. I reported it to Sheriff Barnes when he made his monthly visit to check on us. He was a thin man with a mustache that twitched when he talked, and eyes that never quite met mine. He looked at the boot prints, looked at the broken lock, and shrugged. "Probably just kids," he said. "You know how they are. Looking for a place to smoke and drink where their parents won't find them." "Kids don't carry crowbars," I said. Maybe it was already broken. Old barn like this, things fall apart. He tipped his hat and drove away. I watched him go, and I understood something that I had been slow to accept. The sheriff was not going to help us. Whether he was in Clayton Hargrove's pocket or simply did not care what happened to two orphans on a worthless ridge, the result was the same. We were on our own. The second sign came a week later. I was walking the property line, checking the boundary markers that Isaac had set decades ago when I found the survey stakes. Fresh stakes driven into the ground within the last few days, each one marked with red paint and a number. Someone was surveying our land. I pulled up every stake I could find and threw them into the ravine. Then I went back to the cabin and wrote a letter to the county clerk demanding to know who had authorized a survey on private property without the owner's permission. The clerk wrote back 3 weeks later. The survey had been requested by Clayton Hargrove in preparation for a potential purchase. It was standard procedure, perfectly legal, and I had no grounds for complaint. I crumpled the letter and threw it into the stove. Silas found me sitting on the porch that evening, staring out at the orchard in the fading light. He's not gonna stop, Silas said. I know. What are we gonna do? I did not have an answer. Not then. But I would. The third sign was the fire. It happened on a night in late March. I woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of brambles screaming. I ran outside in my nightgown barefoot in the mud and saw flames leaping from the barn. The fire was already too large to fight. The old dry wood burned like paper. The flames climbing the walls and licking at the remains of the roof. I could hear Bramble inside that terrible sound a mule makes when it is dying, and I ran toward the fire without thinking. Silas caught me. He was stronger than he looked, and he held me back even as I fought him, even as I screamed at him to let me go. "She'll die," I shouted. "You'll die," he shouted back. And then Obadiah was there. I do not know how he got there so fast. I do not know how he knew. But he was there, and he had a blanket from the creek, soaked and dripping, and he wrapped it around himself and ran into the fire. The longest minute of my life passed. Then another. Then Obadiah emerged from the smoke leading Bramble by a rope around her neck. The mule's coat was singed in places and she was terrified, but she was alive. We stood there in the mud and watched the barn burn. There was nothing else we could do. By the time the fire burned itself out, the barn was gone. Nothing left but charred beams and ash, and the smell of destruction. Obadiah sat on the ground, his face black with soot, his hands blistered from the rope. "Hargrove," he said. It was not a question. "I can't prove it." "You don't need to prove it to know." He looked at the ruins of the barn, at the smoke still rising into the pre-dawn sky. Man like that, he doesn't lose gracefully. When he can't buy what he wants, he tries to destroy it. I thought about what Hargrove had said on the porch. "You'll die up here." I thought about my grandfather who had spent 30 years being laughed at and had never fought back, who had never tried to hurt the people who hurt him, who had just kept working, kept believing, kept waiting for the day when the trees would prove him right. "I'm not going to let him win," I said. Obadiah smiled. It was a grim smile, but there was pride in it too. "No," he said. "I don't believe you are." I did not go to the sheriff. There was no evidence, and everyone knew the sheriff owed his job to Clayton Hargrove. I did not confront Hargrove or try to retaliate. I did not do any of the things that anger told me to do. Instead, I went back to the notebooks. Notebook Number 8 contained a passage I had read a dozen times but had not fully understood until that morning standing in the ashes of the barn, watching the sun come up over the ridge. The orchard has taught me patience. Not the patience of waiting for something to happen, but the patience of working towards something even when no one else can see it. The world will always have men who take and men who destroy. But the soil does not care about men. The soil cares about time and work and faith. Put your faith in the soil. Do the work, and time will prove you right. I closed the notebook. I looked at Silas. "We're going to follow his instructions," I said. every single one. And when the trees bloom, when they produce fruit like Isaac said they would, everyone will see. Hargrove will see. The whole county will see. And then what? Silas asked. Then we'll decide what to do with the harvest. Spring came in March the way it does in the mountains, not gradually but in a rush. A week of warm rain followed by a burst of green so sudden it felt violent, as if the earth had been holding its breath and finally let go. I was in the orchard at dawn on March 14th. I had been walking the rows every morning since the snow melted, checking each tree, running my hands along the bark, looking for any sign of change. For weeks there had been nothing. The trees stood silent and gray, their branches bare, their bark cold under my fingers. But that morning was different. I saw it on tree number 47, a gnarled Alberta near the center of the orchard. According to Isaac's notebooks, this tree had been the last one to stop producing fruit, the last one to go dormant, the one that had held on longest before surrendering to whatever call the root network was making. I'd been checking it every day, running my fingers along its branches, waiting. And there it was, a bud, small and pink and tight as a fist, emerging from a swollen node on a branch that had been bare wood for 12 years. I stood there staring at it. I could not move. I could not breathe. I reached out and touched it with my fingertip, half expecting it to disappear, to prove itself a trick of the light or a figment of my desperate imagination. But it was real, firm and cool under my finger. Unmistakable life returning to a place the whole world had declared dead. I ran back to the cabin. Silas. He came stumbling out the door, still half asleep, his hair sticking up in every direction. What is it? What's wrong? I grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the orchard. Nothing's wrong. Everything is right. Come see. By the end of the week, every tree in the orchard was budding. By the end of March, the hillside was pink. Not the pale, tentative pink of a young orchard finding its feet. A deep, saturated, almost furious pink, the color of something that had been waiting a long time and was done waiting. The blossoms were larger than any I had seen in the valley orchards, and they came in clusters so thick that the branches bent under their weight. I walked through the rows and touched them. I needed to feel them to confirm that this was real, that the gray skeletons had become this living, breathing, blooming thing. The petals left pollen on my fingers, dusty gold, and the smell of them was overwhelming. A perfume of peach blossom and warm earth and the sweet rot of last year's leaves. The bees came from everywhere. From miles, it seemed, drawn by a scent they could not resist. The sound of them was a low, continuous roar, like a river heard from a distance, and it filled the orchard from dawn to dusk. I lay in the grass between the rows and listened and felt the ground hum beneath me. I understood then that I was lying on top of something vast and alive, a network of roots and fungi and soil that had been building itself in silence for 30 years, and it had chosen this spring, my first spring, to announce that it was ready. People noticed. You could not help but notice. Shadow Peak Ridge, which had been a gray scar on the eastern skyline for a decade, was suddenly blazing with color. Drivers on the valley road slowed down to look. Word spread through the feed store and the church and the diner on Main Street. Within a week, people were driving up the track to see it for themselves. I let them look. I did not explain. There was nothing to explain that they would believe. They came in their automobiles and stood at the edge of the orchard and stared. Some of them were silent. Some of them whispered to each other. I heard fragments of their conversations carried on the wind. "How is this possible?" Isaac said. "They were alive." I didn't believe him. "Look at the size of those blossoms. That's not natural." I stood on the porch and watched them watching the trees. I saw their faces change as they began to understand. This was not a trick. This was not a fluke. This was exactly what Isaac Blackwood had spent 30 years trying to tell them. The dead orchard was alive. Among the visitors was a woman I had never seen before. She was perhaps 40, dressed in practical clothes, with gray-streaked hair, pulled back in a bun, and the bearing of someone who had spent her whole life being underestimated by men. She walked through the orchard, slowly stopping at each tree, touching the blossoms with careful fingers. She pulled a notebook from her bag and began to write. I approached her. "Can I help you?" She looked up, startled, then smiled. "I'm Cordelia Finch. I'm the agricultural extension agent for Mitchell County. I heard about your orchard and I had to see it for myself." She held up her notebook. "This is remarkable. I've never seen anything like it. The bud density, the uniformity of the bloom, the size of the petals. This is not normal peach tree behavior. My grandfather spent 30 years studying this land," I said. "Isaac Blackwood. I knew of him. Most people thought he was crazy. Most people were wrong." Cordelia Finch smiled again. It was a smile of respect. The kind of smile one scientist gives another when acknowledging work well done. "May I ask you something? Do you have his research notes?" I hesitated. The notebooks were precious to me. They were the only thing Isaac had left us besides the land itself. But I thought about what he had written. "The orchard has taught me patience. Put your faith in the soil. Do the work, and time will prove you right." Time was proving him right. The whole county was seeing it. But if his work was going to be recognized, if his name was going to be cleared of the mockery it had endured, someone besides me needed to understand what he had done. "Yes," I said. "I have his notebooks. Would you let me see them?" I brought her to the cabin. I showed her the tin box, the 11 notebooks, the careful documentation of 30 years of patient observation. She read for 3 hours. When she finished, her expression had changed completely. "Miss Whitmore," she said, "your grandfather was conducting legitimate scientific research. Self-taught, yes, but rigorous, methodical. The kind of work that most professional agronomists would envy." She closed the notebook carefully. "And if his calculations are correct, this orchard is about to produce fruit unlike anything this county has ever seen. Will you help us?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I'm going to send samples to the university in Raleigh. If your grandfather was right about what's under this ridge, The whole state needs to know about it. She left that afternoon with 3 jars of the black earth and a notebook full of notes. I stood on the porch and watched her drive away, and for the first time since we had arrived on Shadow Peak Ridge, I felt something that might have been hope. But hope is a dangerous thing. Hope makes you believe that the worst is over. Hope makes you careless. I should have known that Clayton Hargrove would not let the blooming orchard change anything. I should have known that a man who burns barns does not surrender just because a few trees grew flowers. He came back on an evening in early April, not in his automobile this time, on foot walking up the track like he owned it with 2 men I did not recognize following behind him. Big men. The kind of men who got paid to intimidate people. I met them at the edge of the orchard. Mr. Hargrove, Miss Whitmore, pretty flowers you've got. Must have made you feel real proud seeing them bloom like that. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. I'll give you $100 for the property. Final offer. I told you, I'm not selling. You misunderstand me, I'm not asking. He gestured to the men behind him. These gentlemen are from the county assessor's office. They've completed a new evaluation of your property. Turns out there's been a mistake in the tax records. Your grandfather hasn't paid property taxes in 5 years. You now owe the county $637 in back taxes plus penalties and interest. My blood went cold. That's not possible. The lawyer said the estate was settled. The lawyer was wrong. Or maybe he just didn't look hard enough. Hargrove pulled a document from his pocket. This is an official notice of tax delinquency. You have 30 days to pay in full, or the county will seize the property and sell it at auction to recover the debt. He held it out to me. Now I'm a reasonable man. I'm willing to take this property off your hands for $100, which is more than generous considering you'll owe the county 6 times that much. You walk away with cash in your pocket and no debt. Everybody wins. I took the document. I read it. The numbers swam before my eyes, but the meaning was clear enough. $637. I did not have $637. I did not have $67. The money Obadiah and the others had given us had gone to food and tools and lamp oil. We had nothing. You did this, I said. You falsified these records. Hargrove's smile widened. Careful, Miss Whitmore. That's a serious accusation. Accusing a county official of fraud without evidence could land you in a lot of trouble. He turned to go. The 2 men followed him. At the edge of the trees, he stopped and looked back. 30 days, he said. Then this ridge is mine. I stood there holding the notice as they walked away. I stood there until the sun went down and the first stars appeared, and the cold evening air made me shiver. I stood there trying to understand how we had come so far, only to lose everything to a piece of paper and a number I could not pay. Silas found me in the dark. Elena, he's taking the land. He found a way to take it. I told him about the taxes, about the 30 days, about the $637 we did not have. Silas was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I did not expect. "How much will the peaches be worth?" I looked at him. "What?" "Isaac's notebooks. He estimated the harvest." "How much will it be worth?" I thought back to notebook number 9, the calculations, the projections. He thought we'd harvest 20,000 pounds in the first year. Maybe more. And what do peaches sell for? I don't know. 10 cents a pound, 15. Silas did the math in his head. He had always been quick with numbers. "That's $2,000, maybe 3,000. The harvest isn't until June. We have 30 days. Then we need to make sure they give us more time." He looked at me with an expression I had seen before. The expression he got when he was thinking through a problem, turning it over in his mind, until he found the solution no one else could see. We need to show them what the orchard is worth, not what it's worth now, what it's going to be worth. We need to make them wait. I did not know if it was possible. I did not know if anyone would listen. But I knew one thing. We had not come this far to surrender now. The trees were blooming. The whole county could see it. And in 2 months, those blossoms would become fruit. All we had to do was hold on long enough to harvest what Isaac had spent 30 years preparing for us. All we had to do was survive. I went to see Cordelia Finch the next morning. She lived in a small house on the edge of Pine Haven, a tidy place with a garden in front and a workshop in back where she tested soil samples and grew experimental crops for the county farmers. She was in her workshop when I arrived, bent over a microscope, and she looked up when I knocked. "Miss Whitmore, I wasn't expecting you. I need your help." I showed her the tax notice. I told her about Hargrove's ultimatum. I watched her face darken as she read the document. "This is fraud," she said. "Pure and simple. Your grandfather paid his taxes. I can check the records myself. Hargrove controls the records, or he controls the people who keep them. Then we'll go over his head. I'll write to the state agricultural department. I'll write to the governor if I have to. That will take months. I have 30 days. Cordelia set down the notice. She looked at me with an expression that was part sympathy, part calculation. The look of someone trying to solve a problem they knew had no easy answer. "How much do you need?" $637. She winced. It was a fortune. More money than most people in Mitchell County saw in a year. "The peaches," she said. "When will they be ready?" "June. Early June if the weather holds." "That's too late." "I know." We sat in silence for a moment. Then Cordelia stood up and walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the workshop. She pulled out a folder and brought it back to the table. "I sent those soil samples to Raleigh 3 weeks ago. The results came back yesterday." She opened the folder. Inside were several pages of dense scientific text charts and graphs and chemical analyses that meant nothing to me. But at the bottom of the first page, underlined in red ink, was a single sentence. "Sample exhibits soil characteristics consistent with ancient alluvial deposit of exceptional fertility. Recommend immediate follow-up study and potential designation as site of agricultural significance. Agricultural significance, Cordelia said. That's government language for this is important and we should protect it. What does that mean? It means I can petition the state to delay any property seizure until a full geological survey is completed. It means I can argue that this land has scientific value beyond its tax assessment. It means I can buy you time. How much time? 60 days, maybe 90 if I make enough noise. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly, but the possibility of relief. Will it work? I don't know, but it's the best chance you have. She pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. Her handwriting was clear and precise, the handwriting of someone who had spent years filling out forms and filing reports and navigating the bureaucracy of government offices. I'll submit this today. I'll send copies to every department I can think of. Agricultural Extension, Geological Survey, State Historical Society. I'll make so much paperwork that Hargrove won't be able to move without tripping over it. She looked up at me. But you need to understand something. This will make him angry. Very angry. Men like Hargrove don't like being outmaneuvered by women, especially women who know more than they do. He's gonna fight back. Let him fight. Cordelia smiled. It was a fierce smile, the smile of someone who had spent her whole life being underestimated and had learned to turn that underestimation into a weapon. Good, she said. Then let's give him a fight he won't forget. The petition worked, or at least it worked well enough. 2 weeks after Cordelia filed her paperwork, a letter arrived from the state agricultural department. It informed me that my property had been flagged for potential geological significance and that any seizure proceedings would be delayed pending completion of a comprehensive soil survey. The survey would take approximately 60 days. 60 days. It was enough. Barely, but enough. The peaches would ripen in early June. The survey would not be complete until mid-July. If we could harvest and sell the fruit before the survey ended, if we could earn enough to pay the taxes and prove the orchard's value, we might have a chance. But that was a lot of ifs. Hargrove came back 3 days after the letter arrived. He did not bring his men this time. He came alone, driving up the track in his black automobile, and when he got out, his face was red with rage. "You think you're clever," he said, "getting the state involved, filing your petitions and your forms and your scientific surveys. I think I'm protecting what's mine. Nothing on this ridge is yours. Not yet. Not until you pay what you owe. I'll have the money in 60 days. He laughed. It was an ugly laugh full of contempt and certainty. You'll have nothing. Those trees aren't going to produce enough fruit to pay for lamp oil, let alone $600 in taxes. Isaac spent 30 years lying to himself about this orchard, and you're doing the same thing." He stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell the tobacco on his breath. "I'm going to own this ridge. The only question is whether you walk away with something or whether I take it all from you in front of the whole county. Your choice. Get off my land. For a moment, I thought he would refuse. For a moment, I thought he would hit me. But then he turned and walked back to his car. 60 days, he called over his shoulder. Then we'll see who was right. I watched him drive away and I felt something cold and hard settle in my stomach. Fear, yes, but also determination. I had made my choice. I had decided to stay, to fight, to trust in the work Isaac had done and the promise the orchard represented. Now all I had to do was prove I was right. The blossoms began to fall in late April. The petals drifted through the orchard like pink snow, carpeting the ground between the rows, and where they fell, the fruit began to swell. Small green nubbins at first, hard as stones, but growing. I checked them every day, sometimes twice a day. I followed Isaac's instructions from notebook number 10, thinning the fruit clusters to ensure the remaining peaches would have room to grow. It was painful work plucking away perfectly good fruit so that the best ones could thrive. But Isaac had been clear. Quality over quantity, size over numbers. Better to harvest one perfect peach than 3 mediocre ones. May brought heat. Day after day of cloudless skies and temperatures that climbed into the 90s. The valley orchards suffered. I could see them from the ridge, the trees in the bottomlands, wilting under the relentless sun, their leaves curling and browning at the edges. But our trees stayed green. The root network Isaac had documented, the vast underground web that connected every tree in the orchard, was drawing water from depths the valley trees could not reach. Even in the heat, even with no rain for 3 weeks, our trees stood strong, and the fruit kept growing. By the end of May, the peaches were the size of my fist. Their skins had begun to change color, shifting from green to gold, from gold to a deep amber, touched with crimson. I picked one to check its progress, held it in my hand, felt its weight. It was heavier than it should have been, denser, as if the minerals from the black earth had concentrated themselves into this single piece of fruit. I bit into it even though it was not yet ripe. The flesh was hard and tart, but underneath the tartness I could taste something else, something rich and complex that made me think of honey and sunlight and the smell of soil after rain. Silas found me sitting under tree number 47 with juice running down my chin. "How is it?" he asked. "It's going to be extraordinary." The first peaches ripened on June 3rd. I knew they were ready because the skin had darkened to that deep crimson gold that Isaac had described in his notebooks, because the fruit gave slightly when I pressed my thumb against it, because the smell that rose from the orchard that morning was so powerful, so intoxicating that it made my head swim. I picked the first ripe peach with trembling hands. I held it up to the light and looked at it, really looked at it. It was huge, half again the size of any peach I had ever seen. Its skin was smooth and perfect, without blemish or bruise. And when I bit into it, when the juice burst across my tongue and ran down my throat, I understood why Isaac had spent 30 years waiting for this moment. The taste was indescribable. Sweet, yes, intensely sweet. but with a complexity beneath the sweetness that was almost startling. A mineral depth, a richness that tasted the way the black earth smelled, as if the soil itself had been distilled into fruit, as if 30 years of patience and darkness and building had been compressed into this single perfect peach. I stood there with my eyes closed, and I understood finally what Isaac had known all along. The trees had been waiting for this. The root network had been preparing for this. Every year of apparent death had been a year of hidden investment, and this fruit was the return. "Elena," Silas said. His voice was strange. I opened my eyes. "Are you crying?" I had not realized I was. We picked 23,000 pounds of peaches that summer. 23,000 pounds from an orchard that everyone said was dead. Obadiah and Verity helped us, and we hired 2 more workers from town, paying them in cash and peaches, and the 4 of us worked from dawn to dusk, our hands stained amber with juice, our backs aching from the reaching and lifting. But before we sold a single peach, before we took a single bushel to market, I did something that Silas did not understand. I loaded Bramble's wagon with crates of fruit, and I drove down to Pine Haven. I set up a table in the town square with a handwritten sign that said, "Free peaches. Take what you need." People came slowly at first, cautiously, suspiciously. They looked at the sign, and looked at me, and looked at the fruit, and they did not understand. "Free by..." Mrs. Adelaide from the general store asked. "Free," I said. "Why?" I thought about how to answer. I thought about the letter Isaac had written. I thought about 47 envelopes returned unopened. I thought about a man who had spent 30 years being called a fool and had never become bitter. "Because my grandfather would have done it," I said. Word spread. Within an hour, there was a line stretching down Main Street. Families came. Poor families. Families who had lost their crops to the drought. Families who had not tasted fresh fruit in months. They came and filled their baskets and their bags, and some of them cried when they bit into the peaches. "I've never tasted anything like this," one woman said. "Where did these come from?" Another asked. "Shadow Peak Ridge, the dead orchard." They looked at me with new eyes, with something like awe. I gave away 300 pounds that day. 300 pounds that I could have sold, that I needed to sell. But I needed to do this more. Among the people who came was Roy Bascom. I remembered him from the courtroom. He had been sitting in the back row, and he had laughed louder than anyone except Hargrove himself. He approached the table slowly. He took off his hat. That gesture, the hat in the hands, the universal posture of someone who has come to say something that costs them. "Miss Whitmore," he said. I waited. "I came to apologize. I laughed at you in that courtroom. I said things I shouldn't have said. I thought your grandfather was crazy, and I thought you were foolish, and I was wrong about both." He looked down at the peaches. "I lost my orchard this summer. Every tree. 40 years I've been growing peaches in this valley, and I never lost a whole crop before. He looked up at me. You saved my family. These peaches you're giving away, my wife is gonna can them. They're gonna get us through the winter. I'm glad, I said. I'm not finished. Your grandfather helped me once a long time ago. 20 years back, my well went dry and I couldn't afford to dig a new one. Isaac came over with a divining rod and a shovel, and he found water for me. Didn't ask for anything in return. I never thanked him properly. I was too proud. He paused. I'm not too proud anymore. He held out his hand. I looked at it for a moment. Then I took it. Thank you, Mr. Bascom. Thank you, Miss Whitmore, for being better than we deserved. He drove away. I watched him go. And then they came. One by one over the following days. The people who had laughed in the courtroom drove up the ridge to apologize. Some of them brought gifts. Some of them brought stories about Isaac, about ways he had helped them that I had never known. Some of them just came to say they were sorry. Reverend Miller told me that Isaac had anonymously donated money every Christmas to buy presents for the children in the county who had none. Wallace Penn, who owned the dry goods store, told me that Isaac had helped him bury his wife when she died, digging the grave himself, because Wallace was too grief-stricken to hold a shovel. Story after story. Act of kindness after act of kindness. A lifetime of generosity that no one had ever talked about, because Isaac had never wanted credit for any of it. By the end of June, I had learned more about my grandfather from the people who had laughed at him than I had ever learned from his notebooks. The peaches sold faster than we could pick them. The grocer in Pine Haven, a man named Henderson, who had been buying Valley peaches for 20 years, bit into one and looked at me with an expression of pure astonishment. Where did this come from? He asked. Shadow Peak Ridge. Nothing grows on Shadow Peak Ridge. It does now. He bought every crate I brought him. Then he bought more. Then he called his supplier in Asheville and told him to send a truck. Word spread beyond the county. People tasted our peaches and came back and brought their neighbors. I set up the stand at the fork of Willow Creek, and by the second week there was a line of automobiles stretching back toward the main road. We made more money that summer than I had ever seen in my life. Enough to pay the taxes with money left over. Enough to fix the chimney and put a roof on the barn and buy Bramble proper feed and ourselves proper clothes. Enough to buy tools and seeds and everything we would need for next year's harvest. Enough to know that we were going to survive. I brought the tax payment to the county clerk on July 15th. $637 in cash counted out in front of witnesses with a receipt, signed and stamped and filed in the official records, where no one could dispute it. The clerk looked at the money with an expression I could not read. Surprise, maybe, or disappointment. Mr. Hargrove said you wouldn't be able to pay, he said. Mr. Hargrove was wrong. I took my receipt and walked out of the courthouse. Silas was waiting for me on the steps. Is it done? He asked. It's done. The land is ours. We stood there for a moment in the summer sun, two orphans who had been given nothing and had turned it into everything. What do we do now? Silas asked. I thought about Isaac's letter, about the notebooks and the 47 returned envelopes, and the 30 years of patient work. I thought about Obadiah bringing food up the ridge, about Cordelia fighting the bureaucracy, about Roy Bascom taking off his hat. Now we keep going, I said. We harvest, we plant, we wait for next year. We do what grandfather taught us to do. Clayton Hargrove came last. It was a Saturday evening in late July. The leaves had reached their full summer green, and the orchard hummed with the sound of insects and birds and the rustle of wind through branches heavy with fruit. I was sitting on the porch when I heard his automobile. The same black car, the same careful way he picked his way around the puddles. But when he got out and walked toward the cabin, I could see that something had changed. He looked old. Not just older. Old. The confidence that had defined him for as long as anyone could remember was gone, replaced by something that looked like defeat. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps. He did not speak for a long time. I tried to buy this land for 20 years, he finally said. Every year I came up here and made Isaac an offer. Every year he said no. I thought he was stubborn. I thought he was foolish. I thought he was holding on to something worthless out of pure spite. He looked out at the orchard. The trees were dropping their second picking now the way healthy trees do when the season peaks. Even in late summer they looked different than they had 9 months ago. The bark darker, the branches fuller, the whole orchard carrying itself with a kind of quiet authority. If I had gotten this land, Hargrove said, I would have cut down the trees within a month. I would have logged the ridge and sold the timber and never known what was underneath. He paused. I would have destroyed the most valuable thing in this county. And I would have done it because I was too impatient to see what Isaac could see. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. I burned your barn. You know that. Everyone knows that. I was angry and desperate, and I wanted to hurt you, because you had what I wanted and you wouldn't sell. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He climbed the porch steps and set it on the railing beside me. That's money for the barn. It won't make up for what I did, but it's something. He turned to go. Mr. Hargrove, I said. He stopped. My grandfather spent 30 years being laughed at. 30 years of people calling him crazy. 30 years of doing work that no one understood or appreciated. And he never became bitter. He never tried to hurt the people who hurt him. He just kept working, kept believing, kept waiting. I stood up and walked to the edge of the porch. You didn't have that faith. You couldn't see past the surface. And that's why you lost. Hargrove stood there for a long moment. Then he nodded once and walked back to his car. I never saw him again. I heard later that he sold his lumber business and moved away. Some people said he went to Tennessee. Others said Georgia. I did not ask and I did not care. He was gone, and the ridge was ours, and that was enough. I need to tell you the rest, but I will tell it quickly, because the years that followed were good years, and good years move faster than hard ones. In 1938, I married a man named Thaddeus Brennan. He was the son of a peach grower from the next county over, and he came to Shadow Peak Ridge to buy seedlings from our orchard. He stayed for dinner. He stayed for a week. He stayed for the rest of his life. We were married in the cabin with Obadiah Trent as witness, and Cordelia Finch reading a poem she had written about soil. It was strange and beautiful, and made everyone cry. Brambles stood outside the window and brayed once during the vows, which everyone agreed was either a blessing or a protest. Bramble died in the spring of 1941. She was old. Nobody knew exactly how old, because she had been old when Isaac bought her. She died on a March morning in the rebuilt barn, lying on her side in the straw. Her breathing slow and peaceful. I sat with her. I put my hand on her neck the way I had done 1,000 times before, and I felt her breath slow and stop. We buried her under tree number 1, the oldest tree in the orchard. The one in the northeast corner where Isaac had dug his first test pit 40 years before. It seemed right. She had been his companion for years before she became ours, and now she would rest in the soil he had spent his life studying. Silas graduated from the Agricultural College in Raleigh in 1942. He came back to Shadow Peak Ridge and took over the management of the orchard, freeing me to raise the children that Thaddeus and I were beginning to have. He married Verity Trent in 1945, and they built a house on the north side of the ridge close enough to visit, but far enough for privacy. In 1955, Verity published a paper in the Journal of the American Society of Agronomy about the Shadow Peak Ridge soil deposit. The paper described the ancient paleosol that Isaac had discovered and the mycorrhizal root network he had documented. It was read by researchers across the country and led to a visit from the Department of Agriculture, who spent 2 weeks on the ridge studying the black earth and the root network. Their report, called the Shadow Peak Ridge Orchard, a demonstration of ecological agriculture, decades ahead of its time, and recommended that Isaac Blackwood's notebooks be preserved as a significant contribution to American soil science. Isaac Blackwood, the fool with his jars of dirt, the crazy man who pressed his ear to the ground and claimed he could hear the roots singing. In 1960, the state of North Carolina designated Shadow Peak Ridge as a historic agricultural site. There was a ceremony. Officials came from Raleigh. A plaque was mounted at the entrance to the orchard. The plaque said, Isaac Blackwood, 1858 to 1932. Discoverer of the Shadow Peak Ridge paleosol. Pioneer of mycorrhizal network research. And below that, Elena and Silas Whitmore, who trusted their grandfather and waited for the trees. I stood at that ceremony with my husband beside me and my children around me. I looked at the plaque and I thought about a man I had never met, a man who had spent 30 years being laughed at, a man who had written letter after letter to 2 children he could not reach, a man who had died alone believing that someday we would come. He did the work. I whispered to Thaddeus. All you did was listen. My husband squeezed my hand. That's not nothing, he said. No, it was not nothing. It was everything. I am an old woman now. It is 1985, and I am 71 years old, and my hands shake when I try to write, and my knees protest when I climb the ladder to prune the high branches. But I still walk the orchard every morning. Last spring, I found my great-granddaughter kneeling in the dirt between the rows, her hands black with soil, her face full of concentration. She was 12 years old, with her grandmother's eyes and her great-great-grandfather's patience. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked up at me. "Listening," she said. Great-grandfather Isaac said you could hear the roots growing if you were patient enough. I knelt down beside her. My old knees protested, but I ignored them. "And what do you hear?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled. "I hear them," she whispered. "They're still growing, aren't they? After all these years." I put my hand on her shoulder. This child who carried Isaac's blood in her veins, who had inherited his patience and his curiosity, and his willingness to kneel in the dirt and listen for things that other people could not hear. "I want to take care of the orchard someday," she said. "Like you did. Like Grandfather Silas does." "You will," I said. "The trees will wait for you. They're good at waiting." "Yes, ma'am." We stayed there together as the sun climbed higher. 2 generations of Whitmores kneeling in the black earth, listening to the roots grow. The orchard still stands. The trees still bear fruit. Not the original 180, some of which have been lost to storms and age, but their offspring grown from rootstock that carries the same connection to that ancient soil. Silas's grandchildren run the orchard now. They have studied Isaac's notebooks. They understand the science behind what he discovered. They have expanded and improved, but they have never forgotten the fundamental truth that my grandfather taught us. The most valuable things are the ones you cannot see. I think about Isaac often these days. I think about him sitting in his cabin writing letter after letter to children he would never meet. Measuring and documenting and believing in something that no one else believed in. Waiting patiently for 30 years while the world called him a fool. I think about the first time I stood in the orchard and saw nothing but dead sticks. I think about the courtroom and the laughter and the $17 valuation. I think about the winter that almost killed us, and the spring that saved us, and the summer when the whole county had to admit they had been wrong. I think about patience, real patience, not the patience of sitting still and hoping someone will rescue you, but the patience of doing the work even when no one else can see it, of planting seeds that will not bloom in your lifetime, of trusting that the soil knows more than you do, and that if you listen carefully enough, it will teach you everything you need to know. I'm sitting on the porch now, watching the sun set behind the ridge. The orchard glows in the fading light. The leaves golden green, the branches heavy with this year's crop. My great-granddaughter is down there somewhere, walking between the rows, checking the fruit, the way I taught her to check it, the way Isaac's notebooks taught me. She will take care of this place when I am gone. She will read the notebooks and listen to the soil and wait patiently for the trees to teach her what they know. And someday she will pass it on to her children, and they will pass it on to theirs. and the orchard will continue, generation after generation, a living testament to a man who believed in things the world could not see. I close my eyes and I can almost hear it. The sound Isaac described in his final entry. The sound of roots growing deep in the earth, reaching down through layers of clay and stone into that rich black soil, moving so slowly that no instrument could measure them, growing with a patience that makes human lifetimes seem like heartbeats. The sound of something that looks dead, but is only waiting, waiting for the right time, waiting for the right person, waiting to bloom so bright that the whole world has to stop and look. I hear them singing, and I know that somewhere, somehow, Isaac hears them too.